I mean, where do we start? You want to start in a special dividend, or what does it mean really moving forward, I guess, for others?
Yeah, I mean, that's the important part, right? Is what does it mean? And I obviously JD is at a point where it's self-sufficient, can self-finance. So in the statement that Tencent put out, they alluded to that as the reason. But in the backdrop of all of this is the anti-monopoly crusade that's going on in China. And I think a lot of that is underpinning what we're seeing as well. A lot of the concern as it relates to Tencent has been creating fair competition with applications and services mostly from Alibaba, like Taobao and Tmall, and enabling them to compete effectively inside of the WeChat ecosystem. And so this divestment of JD can also be seen as a means to alleviate some of those regulatory concerns and break down those barriers amongst these competing services. And if that's the case, then obviously that leads to the situation where Tencent could look to, reduce its stakes in other e-commerce platforms like PDD. Even Kuaishou, the short video application, has been pushing hard on e-commerce sales. So there's Tencent has a lot of tentacles spread into a lot of different companies, and a lot of those could start to be unwound if this is all being driven by the anti-monopoly crusade.
Anti-monopoly, common prosperity, all part of the same sort of page book or playbook, if you will. Other things such as closed ecosystems, something that Jack Ma used to complain about, Alibaba is still complaining about. What about that as well, and how much of this is being done to preempt further action coming from the state?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what's gone on hasn't necessarily been, extremely well crafted and well telegraphed and said explicitly in explicit terms. It's kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And so from that perspective, there could have been, background talks that led to this. We don't know. I'm sure we'll find out in time. Or as you're alluding to, this could be kind of a preemptive move, a preemptive strike to get in front of further moves by regulators. There has been, things going on with some of Tencent's apps and the security rules that have come into place and things that, seem quite regular, but obviously everything is touchy and everything is sensitive for investors at this moment. But I think as we go forwards, we probably will see more moves from Tencent to kind of reduce its exposure and cross investments in these companies to appease regulators. And at the same time, they've been talking a lot about increasing their investments overseas. They've talked about the metaverse, which is another exciting area. And so I think a lot of the effort and time that's gone into these investments and gone into building these relationships can now start to shift to these other more greenfield opportunities for Tencent.
How rare is this dividend payout plan? Matthew, and I wonder, this is more what we're seeing with Tencent, and of course you mentioned about Meituan, Bilibili. Maybe they're starting to get worried right now. You're seeing that in the market. But is this something that you think other tech giants like Alibaba could do too?
Yeah, I don't think the fear that you're seeing and the reason for the drop in the stocks that you're seeing is necessarily just that these guys are going to sell. It's fear that there's going to be a breaking down of those relationships between the companies. And in the statement, Tencent said they don't see a change to the business relationship with JD, but obviously the regulatory environment is changing. And if this is all tied to that, then that's going to cause that relationship to change just to enable Taobao, Tmall, et cetera, to compete more fairly on the WeChat ecosystem. And so that's a negative for JD. And I think that's what you're seeing more than just the fact that Tencent is going to distribute the shares. It is quite abnormal. I don't think we've seen anything of this scale from Tencent, but they have tons of investments. You can see this on HLDR and the terminal. At some point, they're going to have to get out of them.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's what do you call this? Is it a cash dividend or is it a stock? Well, it's a dividend in the form of stock, but it would have been in place. It would have been in place for a cash dividend. So what I'm trying to get to here, Matthew, is they're not just saving money; they're actually making money from this. Where would they then use that money, given those long-term objectives that you just lined out for us? Look at this fundamentally for us from a company perspective.
Absolutely. I think cloud and cloud software is one of the biggest opportunities for Tencent in the domestic market. And so I think that's a big area that they're going to focus on because that's such an underpenetrated market just in terms of total software spending in China versus the rest of the world. Obviously, I mentioned the metaverse, and Tencent's already a leader in that space and will continue to invest to build that out. And then I think the international overseas gaming market is still heavily underpenetrated by Tencent, especially when you consider their dominance domestically. And so they've already struck in several acquisitions and investments, to date, year to date. And we expect them to continue to be very aggressive internationally to build out, and really go after the console business, which is something they really have had no presence on in the past. So over the next few years, I expect to see Tencent make a lot more investments in the overseas console gaming space.